CBS Young and the Restless spoilers recap Monday, March 9th, 2026 full episodes. The silence in the Abbott mansion was suffocating, broken only by the steady ticking of the pendulum clock in the entrance hall. Kyle Abbott sat at his father's mahogany desk in Jabbit, surrounded by mountains of old legal papers and medical records he had unearthed from the family archives, records that should have never been made public. He was looking for leverage, anything to use against Victor Newman, who was currently holding Jack hostage at an undisclosed location, demanding a ransom from Chancellor Industries. What Kyle found instead made his blood run cold. His trembling fingers traced the faded ink of a DNA test result from over 30 years ago. It was a private test, commissioned by his grandmother, Dina Murderon, but buried by Victor's security team decades earlier. The names were coded, but the code was simple enough for anyone familiar with the people involved. Sample A, Jack Abbott. Sample B, Victor Adam Newman Jr. Probability of paternity, 99.9%. Kyle leaned back in his leather chair, the room spinning. Adam Newman, the black sheep, the constant thorn in the Abbott's family side, the man who had tormented his family for years, was not Victor's son. He was Jack's son. He was Kyle's brother. The truth hit him like a blow. The hatred, the rivalry, the endless battles between them suddenly looked different. If Adam was an Abbott, then the balance of power in Genoa City had just shifted completely. But more importantly, Kyle realized with a sudden clarity this was the key. Victor didn't know, or if he did, he'd buried it so deep that even he believed the lie. "I can't break into the farm," Kyle whispered into the empty room. "I need someone inside. I need my brother." Rain lashed against the windows of the crimson lights, blurring the neon signs of the city outside. Adam Newman sat alone in a corner, sipping his black coffee. He looked weary. Victor's latest trick, kidnapping Jack to force Billy to give in, had left a bitter taste in Adam's mouth. It was cruel, even to that beard guy. It was a mess. "We need to talk." A voice interrupted his thoughts. Adam looked up to see Kyle standing before him. His jacket was soaking wet, his hair matted to his forehead, but his eyes blazed with an intensity Adam had never seen before. "I'm not in the mood for a lecture about Abbott, Kyle," Adam muttered, turning back to his coffee cup. "Go talk to someone else who cares." "This concerns Victor," Kyle said, sitting down at the table uninvited. He lowered his voice, leaning forward. "And it concerns Jack. But mostly it concerns who you really are." Adam let out a dry, humorless laugh. "I know who I am. I'm the one your family hates. I'm the outcast of the Newman family. What's new about that?" Kyle placed a folded copy of the document on the table. He didn't say a word, he just stared at Adam's face. Adam picked up the paper, his expression dejected, as if waiting a lawsuit or restraining order. As he read, his eyebrows furrowed. He squinted at the dates, the medical notes, the signatures. His eyes widened, darting back and forth across the page. His face was pale. "This is a forgery," Adam hissed, crumpling the paper in his hand. "This is one of your pathetic games." "This is Dina's personal file," Kyle said, his voice calm. "I found the original in the archives. Victor hid it to keep Hope by his side. Think about it, Adam. This is about how he treated you, as a tool, as a weapon, never as a son. Not really. Not like the way he treated Nick or Victoria." Adam stared at the table, his breath coming in short gasps. Memories flashed before him, decades of feeling like an outsider in his own family, always having to prove himself to a father who saw him only as a pawn, and Jack. Jack, who often displayed a strange, inexplicable kindness towards him, even when they were enemies. Jack is... Adam couldn't finish the sentence. The words sounded alien, dangerous. "He's your father," Kyle finished for him. "And right now, that man, our father, is rotting away in some prison cell because Victor Newman treats people like property. You have a choice, Adam. You can continue being Victor's henchman, or you can help me save your real family." Adam looked up, and for the first time, the hostility in his eyes was replaced by a storm of chaos and rage. He looked at Kyle, really looked at him, and recognized the resemblance he had always overlooked. The jawline, the sturdy shoulders.
Phyllis Summers was never the kind of woman who made a vow lightly, especially not when the promise required her to wager something as massive as Chancellor against the life of Jack Abbott. By the time this new crisis tightened its grip on Genoa City, desperation had already spread through the Abbott family like poison through the bloodstream. Slow at first, then all at once, until every conversation, every glance, every silence in that house carried the same unbearable, question of whether Jack would come home alive. In that pressure cooker of fear and uncertainty, Phyllis saw an opening, but she also saw a debt, a chance to do something dramatic enough to alter the balance of power and maybe, just maybe, force history to bend in a different direction. She swore she would trade Chancellor for Jack's freedom, and she did not stop there. Lily Winters and the twins became part of the demand as well, raising the stakes even further and making the proposal feel less like a business negotiation and more like a high-wire act over an emotional abyss. It was exactly the kind of move that could either redefine Phyllis as a savior in the eyes of a horrified family or expose her once again as a woman so addicted to dangerous leverage that she could not resist playing with fire even while others were burning. Victor Newman, as always, stood at the center of the storm he created with the cold stillness of a man who believed every life around him was simply another variable to be managed. He did not reject the deal outright. That would have been too simple, too honest, too merciful. Instead, he considered it weighing Chancellor against his need for control, weighing Jack's captivity against the satisfaction of watching the Abbots unravel, weighing the optics of surrender against the pleasure of hearing Phyllis beg, through gritted teeth, for terms he alone could grant. Victor had built his empire on the principle that a man should never give up power unless he is extracting something greater in return, and this proposal tempted him precisely because it was not clean. It was messy, emotional, unstable, and therefore rich with possibilities for manipulation. He could sense weakness in every direction. He could feel the city shifting, smell the panic spreading, watch old enemies and uneasy allies turn on each other under the weight of uncertainty. That was the environment in which Victor thrived, not because he enjoyed chaos for its own sake, but because chaos made everyone else easier to control. Far from Genoa City, Jack Abbott had no such luxury of distance or detachment. He woke each day to the rocking of the yacht and the suffocating knowledge that he remained a prisoner in a room designed to insult him with its polished surfaces and false civility. It was not a dungeon, which somehow made it worse. Victor had not thrown him into filth or darkness. He had placed him inside a floating symbol of wealth and superiority, as if to remind Jack that even his captivity could be staged with elegance when orchestrated by a Newman. The locked room became its own kind of psychological weapon, trapping Jack, not only physically, but mentally, forcing him to confront the humiliating truth that he had been removed from his life, from his family, from every structure of power and routine that made him feel grounded. Yet Jack had survived too much, lost too much, rebuilt too much, to surrender, to panic. He knew his best hope was not brute force but human weakness, and Patty Williams, with all her tangled history and longing, offered exactly that possibility. Jack understood the risk of engaging with Patty. He knew that with her, every gesture could be misread, every kindness mistaken for destiny, every look transformed into an emotional promise far bigger than intended. But survival had no room for purity. So he began to work, carefully measuring his tone, softening his gaze, speaking to the wounded, romantic, unstable part of Patty that had always wanted to be chosen. He promised her a kiss on the yacht, turning the idea into something almost playful, almost intimate, a reward for helping him out of the room and giving him a tour of the vessel. Beneath the surface, of course, there was nothing playful about it. Jack needed space movement, access, and above all, a chance to search for a phone. Without one, he was not merely isolated, he was voiceless. He would need to scan each corridor, each deck, each cabin, each crew station, for some way to contact home, to alert someone, anyone, that he was still alive. The brilliance and tragedy of Jack's plan lay in how much it demanded of him emotionally. This was not just an escape attempt. It was a degradation of his pride, a tactical surrender of personal comfort, a willingness to weaponize intimacy in order to survive. He would flatter Patty, guide her, let her believe she mattered to him in a way that could open doors, both literal and psychological. And if she sensed his manipulation, if she felt mocked or used, the consequences could be catastrophic. On a yacht in the middle of nowhere, offending the wrong person could cost him his last chance. Back in Genoa City, the mood inside the Abbott circle had moved beyond fear and into something raw, more dangerous. Desperation had sharpened every conversation. Diane Jenkins Abbott was no longer content to wring her hands and hope that someone else would fix what had been broken. She had reached the point where grief and fury fed each other until her patience with Phyllis became almost non-existent. It was not only that Phyllis had inserted herself into the heart of the crisis with another grand bargain, it was that every Abbott knew Phyllis's history too well to accept her promises without suspicion. She could talk about sacrifice and redemption all she wanted, but there was always the shadow of self-interest behind her decisions. Always the sense that she wanted credit, vindication, or emotional control as much as she wanted justice. Even when she was sincere, people had learned to distrust sincerity coming from her because it so often arrived wrapped in ego. Still, the possibility that she might actually trade Chancellor for Jack's freedom forced everyone into uncomfortable territory. They could not dismiss her entirely because the situation had already become so monstrous that no option felt clean anymore. Lily Winters, who had her own complicated position within this web of power, danger, and family fallout, represented yet another layer of moral urgency. The twins, innocent and vulnerable amid adult wars, they never chose made the stakes impossible to reduce to corporate strategy. This was no longer just about revenge between Victor and Jack, or even about control of Chancellor. Children had become bargaining points in a game built by ruthless adults, and that alone made the whole situation feel contaminated. While one branch of the family clung to Phyllis's proposed deal as a possible lifeline, another branch began weighing a potential clue, some fragile thread that might lead to Jack before Victor could close his fist completely. The clue did not arrive with certainty or clarity. It emerged the way many truths do in Genoa City, through fragments, inconsistencies, and intuition. Someone remembered a detail that did not fit. Someone else connected a timing issue that had seemed meaningless before. And slowly the impossible began to feel possible. Maybe Jack was not lost in some abstract sense. Maybe he had been deliberately hidden, contained, relocated. That shift in understanding altered the emotional gravity of the situation. A missing man inspires grief. A kidnapped man inspires rage. Nikki Newman, meanwhile, found herself inching toward a truth she never wanted to confront. For years, she had lived at the center of Victor's orbit, sometimes resisting his darkness, sometimes rationalizing it, sometimes pretending that the man she loved could be separated from the empire he built through domination and fear. But there are lines that even long marriages cannot absorb forever, and the kidnapping of Jack Abbott was one of them. Nikki did not discover the truth in a single explosive moment. It came gradually through small fractures in Victor's composure and through a meaningful conversation with Phyllis that left more residue in Nikki's mind than she wanted to admit. Phyllis, volatile though she was, had a way of speaking that made denial difficult. When she chose to drop her usual theatrics and look directly at another person's fear. In that conversation, whether through implication, anger, or painful honesty, Phyllis managed to crack open Nikki's last defense against suspicion. Nikki began to see Victor not as a hard man making ruthless decisions in business, but as someone who may have crossed into criminal obsession while expecting everyone around him to endure it in silence. The realization struck her with the force of emotional vertigo. If Victor had truly kidnapped Jack, then everything about their current life became infected by that truth. Every dinner, every lie, every evasive answer, every late-night absence, every smug moment of calm Victor displayed while the abbot suffered would take on a different meaning. Nikki knew how far Victor could go when threatened, but there was a difference between knowing his capacity in theory and looking directly at the possibility that he had removed a man from his world and hidden him away like damaged property. Worse still was the realization that if she pressed too hard, she herself could become collateral damage. Not because Victor would physically harm her in some obvious way, but because truth has a way of isolating those who see it. Nikki's marriage, her family stability, her own sense of identity as the woman who stood beside Victor through decades of war, all of it could begin to collapse the moment she stopped pretending she did not know what he was capable of. That is what made her internal struggle so devastating. She was not just confronting Victor's crime. She was confronting her own years of accommodation, the times she had looked away, the ways love had softened her resistance until silence started to feel normal.